In The Godfather, Marlon Brando's portrayal of Vito Corleone is one of the greatest demonstrations of silent power ever put on screen. He rarely raises his voice. He doesn't brag. He doesn't threaten people in obvious ways. In fact, the quieter he becomes, the more terrifying he is. People lean in to hear him. They study his expressions. Every pause feels deliberate. His enemies mistake silence for weakness, and they pay for it. Because silence forces others to reveal themselves first. The person who speaks first gives away information. The person who reacts first gives away emotion. The person who explains themselves first gives away insecurity. Meanwhile, the silent observer gathers data. They learn everyone's fears, ambitions, and weaknesses without exposing their own. That imbalance creates power. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful and often has the most to lose. In fact, throughout history, real power has often looked like the exact opposite. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't rush to fill every silence with words, because silence itself is often a form of control. Watch a group of people arguing. The insecure person speaks constantly. They interrupt, explain themselves, and desperately try to dominate the conversation. But then there's usually one person sitting quietly, listening to everything. Everyone unconsciously glances at them before making a decision. When they finally speak, the room becomes still. That is power. In this video, we'll dive into the psychology of silence actually being an indicator of real authority. This is black satin theory. Power is not measured by how much attention you can demand. It's measured by how little you need. This idea appears again and again throughout history, psychology, literature, and film. The people who wield the greatest influence often understand something that others don't. Words are expensive. The more carelessly you spend them, the less valuable they become. One of the most famous examples comes from the ancient Chinese military text, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. He writes that all warfare is based on deception, and throughout the book, he praises concealment, patience, and restraint over brute force. The best generals don't reveal their intentions. They don't boast about their strategies. They appear weak when they are strong, and strong when they are weak. The underlying message is simple. If people know exactly what you're thinking, they can predict you. If they can predict you, they can manipulate you. But if your mind remains partly hidden, you maintain leverage. Silence creates mystery, and mystery creates power. Centuries later, Niccolò Machiavelli wrote something similar in The Prince. He warned rulers against revealing too much of themselves. A prince, he argued, should be difficult to read. People should never know exactly what he feels or what he intends, because uncertainty itself becomes a source of authority. The modern world often misunderstands this. We're taught that confidence means speaking more, posting more, announcing every plan, and broadcasting every opinion. But psychological research repeatedly shows that status and dominance are often associated with calmness rather than loudness. The reason is surprisingly simple. When someone is constantly speaking, we unconsciously assume they're seeking approval. They want validation. They want to convince us. But when someone is selective with their words, we assume they don't need approval. And people who don't need approval appear powerful. Think about the most intimidating teacher you ever had. It probably wasn't the one yelling. It was the one who could stand silently at the front of the room and somehow command everyone's attention without raising their voice. The silence itself became authority. Hollywood understands this principle better than most people. Take the show Breaking Bad, for example. At the beginning of the story, Walter White talks nervously. He over-explains. He tries desperately to convince people that he's capable. But as he transforms into Heisenberg, something changes. He speaks less. His words become slower, more deliberate. He doesn't rush to answer accusations or defend himself. The silence becomes intimidating because it signals certainty. When he says, "I am the one who knocks," the line isn't powerful because it's loud. It's powerful because of everything he no longer feels the need to explain. Real authority often sounds like certainty whispered, not insecurity shouted. This is why some of the most influential leaders in history cultivated restraint. Abraham Lincoln was famous for long periods of silence during cabinet meetings. He would listen for hours before speaking. Rather than dominating every conversation, he absorbed information from all sides and then delivered a carefully considered judgment. People interpreted this patience as wisdom, because wisdom and silence are psychologically linked. We're suspicious of people who have an answer for everything, but we trust people who speak only when they have something meaningful to say. Even Winston Churchill, remembered as one of history's greatest speakers, understood the power of silence. His speeches were filled with deliberate pauses. He knew that silence creates anticipation. A pause says, "What I'm about to say matters." Constant talking says the opposite. There's another reason powerful people tend to be quiet. They're not trying to win every battle. Insecure people feel compelled to respond to every insult, every criticism, every challenge. Powerful people are selective. They understand that attention is a currency, and you should never spend your currency on things beneath you. This idea appears in Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Despite ruling one of the largest empires in history, he constantly reminded himself not to be disturbed by gossip, praise, or criticism. He writes that the best revenge is not to become like your enemy. In other words, don't let others dictate your emotions. The person who controls your reactions controls you. Silence becomes a shield. It protects your focus, your dignity, your peace. And perhaps this is why truly powerful people often appear so calm. They don't need to prove themselves because they've already proven themselves to themselves. The loud person enters a room and asks, "Do you think I'm important?" The powerful person enters a room and asks nothing at all. They are comfortable with silence because they aren't afraid of what it reveals. In fact, they understand something most people spend their entire lives learning. Power is not forcing others to hear you. Power is knowing that when you finally decide to speak, people will listen. Because silence is not the absence of strength. Sometimes silence is strength concentrated, and the most dangerous person in the room is often not the loudest. It's the one quietly observing everyone else, saying little, revealing nothing, and understanding far more than anyone realizes. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications so you're always notified when Black Satin Theory posts a new video.